What's going on, everybody? This is James Grandmaster Facts Boyce, and you're here for another episode of the Facts Project. I'm sorry. Today's special guest, returning guest, once again, Caleb Palmquist. We are here to talk about modern mythology. Thank you.
Hi.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. So, of course, the last time that we had a chat, we were talking about this lovely project behind me right over here, Dragon Grit. So, you have I guess, a unique ability of taking two things and possibly combining it to create a very unique IP. Whether it's Dragon Grit, where basically, if you want to call it this, a Western fantasy, if you want to say vampire unicorn, two very obscure mythical characters merged together in one little section. And also creating another good story. But then we have what you're doing with Medusa. So I'm looking at it, and I'm looking through the passages and the preview pages, and I'm like, what if is he doing Lara Croft was Medusa?
Yeah, that's basically what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would love to see your whiteboard someday because I'm pretty sure you have a bunch of characters on one side and you got a bunch of characters on the other side. And you just take a small black line and you just go like, yeah, that's it. So when we're getting down to the nitty gritty, this is something that I'm saying because this campaign is pretty much based around a few anthologies that you put together in 2019 and 2021. And then you're
Yep.
combining it with this because it all fits symmetry wise, and of course with the characters that belong to it. But tell us about Medusa.
Sure. So Medusa is a one-shot comic. It's a 40-page comic book about Medusa in the modern day, but now she is a globe-trotting treasure hunter, just like Tomb Raider, but she's also on a mission of revenge against the gods who wronged her. And at this point in the story, she's already killed all the other Greek gods except for Poseidon. He's the last one left. He's the one who really did her wrong, and so she's tracking him down by searching for sort of um, ancient clues left in temples, right? For
Okay.
his location. That's where the sort of Tomb Raider part comes in.
Mhm.
And then when she finds him, she's gonna try to take him down once and for all.
Now, bringing out the point that Poseidon is pretty much the main antagonist or the last on her list. If we want to talk about like Arya Stark's list, he's the last on the list that I got to kill.
Yep.
But if we're going down basically the basic structures of Medusa's origin story, you could honestly say that this storyline, even though it's based on something that you're creating as a modern mythology, being how Poseidon assaulted her,
Yep.
uh, raped,
He did rape her. Yep.
pretty much disheveled. She was
Hmm.
betrayed by Athena,
Hmm.
punished her, turned her into a monster, pretty much
Yep.
the monster that everybody may have seen her to be. And I know there's been different stories about her
Hmm.
in the past, to where she's been initially put in the forefront as this monster, but people
Hmm.
don't understand it at one point in time. Like with other gods, and their treachery, they get down to earth, they do their dirt, and they try to leave up out of Dodge without any whim of what they've done.
Yep.
But it's very interesting because the fact that there's so many errors, I guess, of if you want to call it elder passages of mythology, depending on which section of the world you're in. And you've had the ability to do this in the past, and of course with this anthology that you've done back in 2019 and 2021. What is I guess your heavy interest in mythology?
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
No, I said, well, pretty much with all the extensional branches of mythology, depending on what countries they're basically based out of. What was your initial interest in mythology?
Oh, sure. Okay. So, I was really into Greek mythology when I was a kid, just because that's kind of what I was taught in school, at least in my neck of the woods where I grew up in school. That's kind of what was being taught as mythology. Of course, it wasn't until much later that I was kind of exposed to other mythologies. And as you'll see, if anybody's read the Modern Mythology, the two anthology volumes. They've
Mhm.
got a lot of different writers and artists in there, but they take from mythologies from around the world. But of course, as a kid, I was like Greek mythology. That was what I thought
Yep.
was really cool. And then I ended up having a high school class about mythology that was super cool.
Strictly, strictly about mythology? Like,
Yeah, yeah, there was a
damn,
in
I
my
wish
at
I
my
had that class.
yeah, yeah. At my high school, there was a teacher who I've stayed in touch with. He back in like the 90s, he got permission from the school to do a mythology class, and then he just kept it going. I think he just kept teaching it, and they just kept letting him do it for like 20 years. And
Wow.
so yeah, so I took that class and that was super fun. And I ended up taking some like mythology classes in college too because I was interested in it. And so kind of that's where I started to delve deeper into sort of different world mythologies and those stories that make up, I mean, I think the fabric of a lot of different cultures around the world.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's kind of that was how I started out with mythology, and I've always been very interested in it, especially how these stories have kind of changed over time. Because, like you said, Medusa, there's a lot of different versions of Medusa, and in some of the stories, she's just a monster, and we don't really get into like her origin or whatever. And then of course, the origin story that I sort of focus on in this comic is that story of how she was assaulted and then turned into a monster. And of course, if you follow Greek mythology, especially Poseidon and Zeus, there's a lot of stories about assaulting women and then blaming the women for those assaults. And so I don't want to say which character, but there's another character that you may or may not have heard of, who's also going to show up, who's a fellow victim of Poseidon, and was similarly transformed, who will show up um, in this comic.
Nice. So almost like a tag team ally.
Yeah, yeah,
Understood. Understood. Now, of course, the irony in all this is that a lot of people tend to say that comic books are sort of an American mythology because
right.
of the basis of a lot of like stories that are basically put out there, whether it's like superheroes, so on and so forth, because of the characters and the IPs that are created. Because of, I guess if you want to say in the United States, there's not much mythology. If you want to maybe include tall tales and fables, Paul Bunyan,
hmm
Pecos Bill, um,
I would almost might be a little bit of a stretch, but I would say that like the founding fathers kind of have a mythology
they
about them.
do. Yes.
When you think about like Abraham Lincoln isn't really a founding father, but even Abraham Lincoln, and then going back to like George Washington, Thomas
Yeah.
Jefferson, these guys like the legend around them is larger than like the truth about them,
Of course. Yeah,
right?
I agree.
Yeah,
Absolutely agree. Because if you think about it, you know, for something as distinctive as somebody living in 2024 and hearing from a teacher in an elementary school that George Washington had a wooden tooth,
right,
who who would know that would be passed down
right.
almost close to 300 years later?
Yep.
You know, so that it was like, oh yeah, by the way, George Washington had a wooden tooth. Like that story, that exaggerated story that he had a wooden tooth was passed down for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Yep.
But even bringing up like stories like Paul Bunyan just he might have just been a very tall guy
Right.
that had a very big bull with a bluish
hmm
hue.
hmm
So
Sure.
anything that's built in exaggeration and told as a story. And the thing is, I guess if you also come up with the fact that like back in those days there was no TV, there was no radio, So for somebody that could really tell a really good story with the amount of exaggerations that they had, can almost be also foretold as tall tales, legends, and maybe even mythology.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
True.
So your worldview of certain characters, basically, when you started to dive a little bit more into how they were constructed regionally outside of Greek mythology, when
Mhm.
did that start?
Well, I would say probably when I was in college, I really started looking at other different world mythologies, because the courses that I took in college were more based on world mythology, sort of starting with Sumerian stuff
Mm,
like the Gilgamesh, and then moving into different legends from around the world. And that's when I think I started to really look at, well, what are the stories that are told in different cultures, and how does that sort of inform those cultures?
hmm
Um, and then even as I started to do the first modern mythology volume, because the two anthologies, I edited them and I wrote a couple of stories in each of them, but for the most part, they're written by other writers that I invited, and those writers come from all sorts of different cultures too. And so,
True.
like, one thing that I learned is that, like, most African myths don't actually have like a hero's journey, as it were, which is something that just like I blew my mind. I wasn't super familiar with it, and I sort of got more familiar with some of these different stories
hmm
as I learned what people were pitching and bringing to the table. um and so, these different cultures have different values and different
hmm
things that are kind of in those stories. And it's not like, because you can look at, like, you know Greek and Roman and Norse mythology all kind of have like heroes and gods and stuff, and they're like, there's a lot of similarities between those. But it's not like if you look around the world, all the legends are just like different versions of those same characters. They're like totally different, and they represent those different values and cultures and ideas, which I just think is really cool. It really makes you think about, you know, that the world isn't a monolith, right? We have all
hmm
these different cultures that evolve separately, um, and they all have something interesting to say.
Definitely. Now, when you first put this together, whether it was your modern mythology, the hero's journey back in 2019, before the pandemic,
Mhm.
um, of course, the comic world was a definitely a different place. How did that come about? Like putting that together for the very first time. Of course, the brain trust is somebody like yourself who had fallen in love with mythology in the past, taken classes on it, have has been a student of it. So, where did you find these like-minded people to be like, "Hey, would you like to tell a story about mythology?" And
Right.
all put it into shorts inside of one book.
It's a good question. When I did the first one, I really hadn't had any success yet with comics. And so this is an interesting project because it's really reaching back to my early roots as a comic book creator.
Mhm.
Because I was doing comics then. I started doing comics in about like 2016, but up until around 2020, I hadn't really had any kind of major successes
Really?
with comics. And so I was just, at the time, anthologies were a pretty popular thing to do on, especially on Kickstarter, crowdfunding,
Yeah.
um, because people wanted to work together. It was an opportunity for people to collaborate on something. And I kind of just reached out to communities where I knew people had participated in anthologies before, and I said, if you have a specific interest in mythology, you could pitch a story. And I was lucky enough that that first time a good number of different writers and artists wanted to come and pitch some stories for that project. And it turned out to be a decently popular project, which I think really helped when I came back for the second volume a couple of years later,
Mhm.
and I definitely got a lot more submissions that time. Not only because I think the first one had been fairly popular, but also because by that time I had done Unicorn Vampire Hunter, which was kind of something that gave me a little more notoriety. Um, People were starting to look at me a little bit more like someone who knew maybe what he was doing
Yeah.
when it came to comics. Um, and so yeah, I mean, I think was more about first finding people who were making comics, and then from amongst those people, um, who was interested in mythology. And for the most part, I found that a lot of people who tell stories are interested in mythology. I mean, people who are already
True.
making comics
Yeah,
like mythology because it really, like you said, like American comics kind of are at their core their own mythology. And so I think we're all kind of tuned into that idea of these myths that make up the fabric of our culture.
definitely. Now, and that one person in particular that's pretty much scattered throughout like your campaign page is a friend of the podcast, good old Greg Anderson Elysee.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I'm so glad you have his book
I have
because
a few of his books.
yeah, Greg is awesome. I could talk about Greg all day because not only has he participated in both Modern Mythology volumes, he's got new stories in the upcoming remastered versions of those volumes,
Okay.
but he's also going to have a story in our third volume, which we'll be doing at some point, which is in early production now.
Nice.
Um, and but also his None of the War Spider books are so good.
They are.
um and
And they're
uh,
diverse. Like, they're not just like I'm a shock and horror you to death. I'm not just gonna bring the mythology out of you. He has his one called Birthday Day. That's kind of
yep,
like a kid's book.
yep.
And it brings you into the world of Asnana, which I thought was like, okay, this take is gonna be ridiculously off from the other ones. But then I was like, this is amazing.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, it's super good. They're all good. I've read them all. I love them all, and I think he's just like a very talented writer. And he's also really great at working with artists. I think he finds really excellent
He does.
artists,
Yeah.
and he's also been able to really bring out. I mean, part of why I always wanted to work with him on Modern Mythology is that in so many of his stories, he taps into these different black myths,
Yeah.
right? Like it's not just like black myths from one place. He's going all over the place and getting all these different characters and bringing them in, and he like understands them too. He's not bullshitting us on the myth side of things or like the cultural side of things, which I really like. Plus, honestly, like Greg is a good friend of mine. He's just like he's super cool. He's super inspirational. Um, you
Have you met?
know, I haven't met him in person, but
Okay.
we've talked a lot online. I would love to meet him someday. He lives in New York and
He
I
lives in New
live in
York.
Washington
Yeah.
State, so we're far apart. But when I a few years ago during the pandemic, I actually like went on this like whole health and fitness journey. I like lost a lot of
He's big
weight.
on that.
Yeah. And so he was like super, like every step of the way, he's like a cheerleader, like he's like, which was super awesome. And so yeah, he's just like, plus he's like really big on all of the uh you know LGBT stuff. Like
Yep.
he's big on you know pride and all this other stuff, which is super cool, something I can really relate to. And so yeah, I mean, I think Greg is like one of the all-stars in the indie comics community. And it's some like he's also doing books for Scholastic and stuff, so
He is.
like to a certain degree, he's not even an indie guy anymore. He's just like a comics all-star.
Mhm. Yeah,
So,
definitely. I actually got a chance to meet him because I am from a particular city that you actually put in this book, Atlantic City.
oh, okay.
Yeah, so I saw the Carmen San Diego type globe trotting that was happening in the book, and I was like, wait a minute, hold on. Medusa came to my city? So,
Uh,
so yeah,
well,
there was a
yeah,
Comic Con here, and me and Greg met up there.
that's
I
awesome.
got to meet him for the very first time.
That's awesome. Yeah, I would love to meet Greg. Someday if New York will ever let me into their freaking con, I'll go, I'll go there. I apply every year and have yet to get in.
Ah,
But um But yeah, no, Greg's awesome, and he was super gracious enough to come back and do some more stories. So, big fan of Greg. Don't have enough nice things to say about him.
True.
And he is also how I met Daryl Toe, who
That's
draws Unicorn Vampire Hunter.
right.
Because before I ever worked with Daryl on Unicorn Vampire Hunter, he did Is None of the Wear Spider Volume 2.
That's what
Um,
right here.
yep, yep. And so it was through Greg actually that I met Daryl, and Daryl's been working with me ever since. So yeah, big fan.
Definitely. See how things work out in the indie comic community. See, people underestimate the power of this stuff. Whether
Yeah.
I've heard about, of course, stories of people meeting online, whether it's been on Facebook chats, Discords, or anything like that. But and the lending of artists, passing artists from person to person, editors, letterers, so on and
Hmm.
so forth. That just happens often in
Oh
the
yeah.
comic community. Um,
Yep.
so I know that you've had the opportunity, of course, with Dragon Grit, you had the opportunity to collab, of course, with your wife.
Hmm.
Now, is she going to be a part of this anthology when it reaches volume three?
So she is actually part of volume 2,
Oh, okay.
because she and I started dating in 2020, actually.
Okay.
And so she wrote a story um, in volume 2, and she actually colored another story.
Really?
Yeah, so she makes maps for a living, so like digital maps, and so she's very tuned into like um, digital image creation, and she wanted to try her hand at comic book coloring, and she was really good at it. Uh, so so there's yeah, volume 2 actually has a couple things from her, and right now she is working on a story for volume 3 based on a Norse. Uh, I think it's a Norse myth. I don't quote me on that. I could be wrong. She has a specific myth. She hasn't told me too much about it. She's keeping it under wraps, but she's writing a story for volume 3. Um, and so yeah, she's definitely involved for sure.
Well, with her doing maps, you never used her for world building?
Well, we are actually so for Dragon Grit, we're working on a map that she's building. And I don't think we're gonna have it on issue 2, but definitely on issue 3. We're
Mm,
gonna have a big fancy map that you can buy as part of the campaign. Um, and then that will be when we finally get to the first volume, that'll be included in the book, like when you open the book, the map. So yeah, she's and early on she built before we even did issue 1, she did a rudimentary version of that map. So we already have like as we're writing the story, we're like, drawing on the map, and this
mm.
is where they're going. So yeah.
Nice. Now, I'll tell you, if I start if I find a map, I usually am like staring at it for way too long, just looking at
Mhm.
spots that I can find out on the map or distinctive places, whether it's like the Isle of something. Shoot, you might discover Sri Lanka staring at India too long or something like that. You know, just simple things. But if I start staring at a map, I'm usually there for like I'm a good 10 minutes just sitting in there trying to just dive into everything. So that's always good as far as world building, especially the fact that you do have somebody that can create a map because that's a specific skill.
Oh yeah, no, and it's a specific skill, and she's like, I mean, she makes like real world maps for she used to work for a telecommunications company, making maps of like internet and power lines and stuff, and now
Mm,
she actually works for an indigenous tribe, um and she like basically maintains all their digital maps of the reservation and the parcels, and also like wildlife information and all that kind of stuff for the tribe. And so yeah, she's like very deep on the technical side of map making, which I think is cool.
that is amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jeez. Now as far as the work that you're basically putting in here and then going into Medusa, do you see yourself outside of the anthologies, you consider this Medusa, even though it's 40 pages and almost in graphic novel style, to be a one shot. Is there any particular characters that you always thought that outside of maybe just a Medusa that you would dive into?
Yeah, yeah. I have a few other ideas for characters that I would consider doing for mythology. I think some of it just kind of depends on the reception and, once people, because sometimes it's hard to say even while a Kickstarter is going, uh, whether or not people are going to want more. Sometimes you need to like have read the comic and see, you know, because this is something new and different that I'm doing.
Yeah.
So basically, what I'm trying to say is I do have other ideas for other characters that kind of spin out of this and do more stories. But um I kind of want to see how people react to it. Like for example, when I did Unicorn Vampire Hunter #1 and then when I did Dragon Grit #1, I both times after people got the comic, I got a ton of great responses about it. People saying like we got to see more of this.
Right.
And so that's what tells me like, okay, I'm gonna dive in. I'm gonna do more of this.
Mm.
And so yeah, I mean, I have a few other ideas. I don't want to tip my hat necessarily about which characters, but I do have some other characters I'd like to do and expand on. And regardless of how well people like Medusa, I have when we do volume 3 of Modern Mythology, my little wink wink secret is that I can throw in my own little stories that I want to do, even if I don't necessarily think they would
Yeah.
sell on their own, because it's a big story with like 20, a big graphic novel with like 20 stories in it. And
Yeah.
so I can like sneak in a little passion project story in there.
This is true. Look, I mean, I'm not a writer, but I don't know why, but it always compelled me the character of Icarus.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
like did his wings actually melt off when he was trying to fly into the sun, or did he just, inhabit himself in space?
You know, Icarus would be a great modern mythology character. And there hasn't been a modern mythology story in the anthologies about Icarus. So,
See?
um, you know, I guess we'll see. Maybe he'll pop up in volume 3.
There you go. Yeah, definitely, man. Look, now, uh, you have had the opportunity, of course, now, two campaigns in for 2024. What is on your plate for the rest of the year?
Oh yeah. A lot.
Okay,
Okay. So at the end of this month, we're launching Dragon Grit #2. So it's ready to go.
very
It's
quick.
Yes, we are almost done with issue #2. We're gonna have it on Kickstarter at the end of this month. We're actually trying to launch every 3 months with Dragon Grit, where Kay Wilheiser, the artist, is on top of it. She is able to complete an issue about every 2.5, 3 months. And so we're gonna be back on Kickstarter every 3 months with a new issue. And then I have another book um, that is spinning out of Unicorn Vampire Hunter about a very minor character that I wanted to give his own story to. And that book is called Hedgehog Fear Trials. Um, nah.
I like the title. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. Um, as you can probably tell, it's about a hedgehog.
Right.
And he is a member of a group of hedgehogs that have a long line of being proud paladin warriors in the dark forest. And he is the latest to take on the last test before you become a full hedgehog paladin, which is called the Fear Trials.
Mm,
Um, and so that's what that book is about, and it's being drawn by Kit Wallace, who is a super talented artist. He's worked on books like Good Boy, and there's a um, Horus in Hell, if you've heard of that.
mm,
Um, and then he's got a book coming out that's based on the video game High on Life.
yeah.
Um, yeah, and so anyway, that is coming out after Dragon Grit. And then I also have a second issue of my crossover book called Unicorn versus Vampire Detective in Space. Um, so that is all three of those things are coming out this year, before the end of the year. And it's possible, depending on the timing, that we might also get Dragon Grit number 3 out this year,
Yeah, because you said every 3 months. So if
every three
let's see,
months.
yeah. So if the campaign for Dragon Grit ended what last month? What was it? Was it the beginning of May?
That was 2 months ago.
2 months ago, April. So
Mm-hmm.
May, June, July,
Mm-hmm.
and then August, September, October. Man, yeah, you might be able to.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
the plan. And we were able to, from the time the campaign ended, we were able to order the books, get the books, and get them shipped out within about 2 months. And so,
And they
um,
look great.
thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
So this is an amazing year for you, man.
yeah, yeah. So basically, to answer your question, this year I'm trying to take it to 11, as they say,
Yeah.
I'm trying to go full throttle on my career, and it's my goal within a year from now to be doing this full time. So
Challenging
that's
yourself. Good.
that's what I'm aiming for, and I think I'm feeling good about it. I've had some good campaigns. People are responding positively to it,
Yeah.
so we'll see what happens.
Definitely. Well, you got 10 days left on this campaign, and let's just say that you're only like 3 digits away from getting there. So
Hmm.
it's looking fairly little good. I can see you just looked at your screen, so you probably had an
Yep.
update already
Yep.
loaded. So
Yep.
I will wish you congratulations in advance.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah.
Not a problem.
I'm feeling good about it. I do have it on the screen over there. It
Uh-huh.
is it's yeah, we're less than $700 away
Yep.
right as we're speaking. So, yeah, I'm feeling good about it. And yeah, thank you for your support
Of course.
and having me on.
Absolutely, man. So, of course, Modern Mythology, 10 days left in the campaign, live on Kickstarter right now. And more than likely, because I've had the chance to read Dragon Grit once it got dropped off to my house, well, we will be back here once again for Dragon Grit 2.
All right.
All
Sweet.
right. Definitely. So, Caleb Palmquist, James Grandmaster Facts Boys, Facts Project. Everybody go out there and get that live on Kickstarter right now. Modern Mythology, Medusa #1, Modern Mythology volumes 1 and 2.
Mhm.
So out there live on Kickstarter right now. So for everybody at the Facts Project, Kalen Paulquist, we are out.